our next episode, I'm not even keeping track of episodes. Maybe this is, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is episode 5. All right. Arrival onto Cape Cod. But, of course, this is not without trial. They were intending to go to Virginia because if you know your American history, the the people who settled Virginia were there before 1620. They were there in actually 1607. So that's where they were going. Hey, that's good. The New World, Virginia, that's the place. Well, if you look on a map, you would see that England or Holland way up here, and they would have to go down the Atlantic Ocean all the way down, down, down past Massachusetts to Virginia. And little did they know of this very large, we could call it a river in the ocean. It's a path that God placed in the oceans, which is another exciting thing about oceanography, is the paths that God created in the sea to make sailing easier and push you forward. But in this case, they were going against the flow of the water, and this particular path is called the Gulf Stream. You might know about it. Well, they were headed straight to Virginia, not knowing about the Gulf Stream. And it turned out to be too difficult because they had seen Cape Cod, which goes up like this, like an arm up out of the land and has a protective bay. But they were on the outside and they kept going south past the bay that comes out, the peninsula, and tried to go against the Gulf Stream, but it didn't work. So they decided to go back to Cape Cod. And of course, that was a lot better for them. They finally arrived. Yay! We finally found a place that seems physically safe in Massachusetts at Cape Cod, as I said, on November of 1620. This is true thanksgiving to God. They didn't have the feast yet, but they certainly were thankful to God. And that's really what Thanksgiving is all about. It's all about being thankful to God for what he has done. Okay. So, but they were there in November. In Massachusetts, anybody who lives in Massachusetts in November, they know winters are bitterly cold. And the Pilgrims stepped onto land with no houses, no shelter, no one to welcome them. No Virginians were there. And there were 100 people still crowded on the ship, and they urgently needed food and housing. Okay? There's still a lot of people. It's very crowded. Some men began building crude shelters or shelters that were more shanty, but others explored the area and discovered mounds of earth. Interesting discovery here. Reminder, pilgrims are still living on the ship. They're probably anxious to find or build their own homes, but probably running low on food too. So these mounds of earth were abandoned storage pits left by a native tribe wiped out earlier by a plague. So there were Native American Indians in this particular part who had their land and village there, but it was wiped out by a plague, so nobody was living there anymore, but there are still some mounds of earth. Inside these mounds, they found stored corn. Wow! If God hasn't provided with that, I don't know what God has provided, but I don't know what's going on. But I do know what's going on because they saw this as provision from God. Of course, they had no idea. They had no idea it had been inhabited before. they had brought their seeds to plant some crops. But winter already set in and food wasn't really going to grow fast enough for them. So the result was devastating. I just have to pause and cry a little bit in my mind and in my spirit because they've already endured so much. But this winter, the very first winter that they get there, November, December, January, 100, no, out of the 100 pilgrims, half of them, half of the pilgrims died that first winter from sickness and starvation. Let's just have a moment of silence for these pilgrims. Mm. Your best friend dies. Your spouse dies. Your sister dies. I mean, people are just dying left and right all around you. So this was certainly heartbreaking, probably worse than the storms. At least they had each other. And the loss was devastating. But the surviving pilgrims showed remarkable courage and Christian character. Remarkable. They worked tirelessly to care for one another, to bury the dead with dignity, and to continue to trust God and his faithfulness. Their perseverance in the face of unimaginable hardship remains one of the most powerful lessons of this entire story. Unimaginable hardship. It's so inspiring because we have it so easy in this country. We have it so easy. And I just can't imagine enduring all of this. And so I am thankful to God, especially at Thanksgiving, for what the pilgrims endured and what they went through. It's it's amazing. I count it a privilege and a blessing to grow up in America because this is my heritage. We're back for the next episode. And this one is how their interaction with the Indians went. Because if you listen at all in history class or went to public school, you've probably been told that the white person oppressed the Indians. But that is not our original heritage. Okay. Maybe the people in Virginia did that. Maybe they were a little harsher, but that's not true for all the settlers, especially the Pilgrims in Plymouth Plantation. The story of the Pilgrims' interaction with the Indians is quite remarkable. And this is how it goes. God's providence was evident. This is like my topic sentence. Through the arrival of Squanto. Have you heard of Squanto? He's kind of familiar. I mean, yeah, familiar and popular. But one spring day, okay, after they had recovered from their horrible winter, an Indian unexpectedly walked right into their camp. If you know anything about the Pilgrims camp, they had walls. It was a triangular space, and I think it was triangular. Anyway, they had walls. Nobody was coming in. They had guards. They were on guard 24/7. And so no foreigner was getting in. But this man happened to walk right into the camp and he says, "Hello." Like, I don't know if you know this, but Native American Indians do not speak English at this time. They barely know any English people. And here comes an Indian, walks right into their camp and says hello. What? Like, oh my gosh, who is this guy? Why is he speaking English? Well, the Pilgrims were astonished, needless to say, and this man, Squanto, had previously been kidnapped. Okay? Squanto was kidnapped by Americans. I mean, by the English or the white man, and taken to England. Kidnapped, taken to England. but they taught him English there. Okay, they didn't like treat him as a horrible slave. They taught him English. And then they took him back to America or to the New World, as we say it. Took him back to the New World to return to his homeland. Wow, how nice. They probably used him for some work, but they had good intentions apparently because they brought him back and he learned how to speak English. So his unique background equipped him to communicate with the Pilgrims and build a bridge of friendship between them and the local tribes. I don't know about you, but this seems pretty providential that God would bring Squanto into their lives at this time. So I just think it's amazing. But let's read on. This encounter, the ones that the Pilgrims had with Squanto, blossomed into one of the most peaceful and respectful relationships between settlers and Native Americans in early America. Like literally. It was the most peaceful and respectful relationship between the whites from England or the old world into the new world. Contrary to popular claims that colonists oppressed Indians, Bradford, in his own words from this book of Plymouth Plantation by William Bradford, records that Pilgrims treated them honorably and cooperated closely with them. Isn't that amazing? Teach that in your public schools. Teach that in your homeschools, really. This is what you should be teaching your kids. Through Squanto, the Pilgrims met Chief Massasoit, if you know anything about this story, and formed a formal peace treaty, a written covenant promising mutual protection and goodwill. This covenant lasted for decades. A peace treaty with the Indians that lasted for decades? Who can say that? No one but the Pilgrims. God's blessing was on the Pilgrims. Squanto also taught the Pilgrims practical survival skills, including how to plant corn using fish as fertilizer. Have you ever tried that? Any corn growers out there? And this led to a far better harvest. The friendship they had with the Indians and the provisions they gained from God were clear signs of God's guiding hand in the Pilgrims' story of survival and success. And that's the takeaway from this episode. God's hand. It was clear. Don't even try to tell me that God was not in control here. I give glory to God and I thank God for his loving care and superintendence over me and over my nation and over the world. Because there are other stories in other nations similar to this, where God's hand was actually evident in that nation's life and led them to have a country based on biblical principles. That concludes this episode, but I've got one more episode for you, which is the most, it's my favorite, let's say. It's my favorite. So tune in for the last episode of the continuing saga of the Pilgrim story and what you should be thankful for this year during Thanksgiving. Thanks for watching.